I had the biggest rats I'd ever seen, big jungle rats had just taken over the whole house. And I wrote letters home and said, I've got rats over here as big as elephants. I was so excited. And I had roaches, and this was wonderful. It was just wonderful because I mean that didn't last. But I was excited because I'm a missionary. I am a missionary. I've got rats.
Well, ladies, welcome to the No Higher Calling podcast. Whether you are listening or watching this video, you are in for a very special treat today because I have Miss Margaret Stringer with me. Thank you so much for being on the podcast, Miss Stringer.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So, yes, our paths crossed several years back when we were on deputation, raising support to come to Australia. And I was able to get your book, which I'm going to go ahead and put in a plug for. I know you have several, but Jesus Led Me All the Way shares your story, which I won't steal any of your thunder. I know some of that's coming in just a bit on the podcast. But I read it and I was like, wow, this was such an encouragement to me and really challenged my heart to just surrender and let Jesus lead in every aspect of my life. And so I thought, I need to have you on the podcast. And I know I've mentioned that throughout 2025, we're going to have some mission emphasis, Missionary Mondays. And so you're here to really kick that off for us, sharing your story, sharing what the Lord had you do in your years on the field, and then to really help us understand clearly what it means to be a missionary. So we'll hear all of that from you in just a little bit. But why don't you give us a little introduction to yourself?
Yeah, okay. My name is Margaret Stringer, and I grew up in South Carolina in the country. I grew up milking a cow, and I went off to college so I wouldn't have to milk the cow anymore. And God called me to mission field when I was 12 years old and put a desire in my heart to be a missionary like you wouldn't believe. I thought life would not be worth living if I didn't get to be a missionary. And through a lot of struggles and trying to get myself worked through college and accepted by the mission board. And July of 1964, over 60 years ago, I got on that airplane for the first time to go to the mission field. I was so excited. I was so excited that God was going to let me be a missionary. And he let me go, and he let me stay for a little over 40 years. And he's been just a wonderful God, a wonderful friend, and all that I needed. And I was really excited that day I got on the airplane. I'm still excited just about serving the King.
Well, and I feel like as I read your book, the excitement jumped off the page. You can't read your writings or be around you and not be excited. And I love that. We need more of that, because it is a joy to serve the Lord. And I think, I'll be honest, it would be hard for me to find joy serving the Lord in some of the places that he called you to. They're not your normal, comfortable American lifestyle choices. But I love that wherever Jesus led you, that you found joy because your joy was in him. And that is so evident throughout just your life's testimony.
Thank you. Thank you.
Before we jump into you sharing more about your story, let's back up really quick, because you said that you surrendered to be a missionary when you were 12 years old, which is still a child. So was there, how did that happen? Was there missionary exposure, a sermon? And were there people that came alongside you and encouraged you in that? Because I think a lot of us listening are moms of children, and, we want to encourage them to pursue what the Lord has for them.
Well, actually, I had never seen a missionary. And I was in a church that we didn't have missionaries come. And so I had never even seen one. But My father died when I was 8 years old, so my mom was working and didn't go to church a lot, but the pastor and his wife would, that was before the days of church buses. And pastor and his wife would pick me up and take me to church. And pastor's wife took a real interest in me and was pushing me in all the activities of the church. And she was always giving me these books to read. And actually these books were about, most of them were about missionaries, Adoniram Judson, Hudson Taylor, and, Mary Slessor. I was reading these books when I was 11, 12 years old. And the Lord spoke to me through those books. And I wanted to be just like them. And I wanted to be a missionary. And I went forward in that church at 12 years old, told them that God was calling me to be a missionary, and they didn't take me serious. Now, I know that because they told me so later. But I had the pastor's wife who was encouraging me all the way through. And I just wanted to be like those missionaries that I had read in those books.
Well, I love that. I love books, and I have infused that into my home. We are a family culture that loves books. I'm having my oldest in particular. She's 8, but she can read like she's 18. And so she's been reading missionary biography. So that's an encouragement to me to keep going. And, it's interesting. You were reading Mary Slessor and Adoniram Judson and these, heroes of faith, we call them. But now, the next generation is reading of Miss Margaret Stringer and a hero of the faith. So I'm just so honored to have you on here to share. Why don't you kind of share with us? You've shared kind of how you got on that airplane. What happened after you got off? Where were you? What did the Lord have you do in your years of ministry?
Well, I tell you, when the Lord called me to be a missionary, I wanted to go to primitive people. And I wanted to go as far away from home as I could go, because I thought the farthest you went, that measured missionary. You couldn't go close. You had to go a long way. And of course, when I went, I couldn't go any farther. I was coming back home again. And I wanted to go to primitive people. And I ended up with some of the most primitive people in the world in New Guinea. Now, this is not Papua New Guinea. That's the one end of the island is Papua New Guinea. The other end of the island now is called Papua Indonesia. And it's a same island, different country. And so when I got there, I was met by missionaries. In fact, I went with the missionaries. I met a missionary couple in Los Angeles. So we went the rest of the way by ourselves, went through Jakarta and had a week in Jakarta, not knowing one word of Indonesian. And that was really interesting. And then we got into the island, and we were met by missionaries, and they was in a house. When the missionaries first went, they'd put up these king strand houses. It's really a metal house. And a metal house in the tropics. You don't want to live in it. They put them up because they were in a hurry. And after they got them put up, they got out of them in a hurry. And so this house, nobody had lived in it for years. And all the weeds and grass would up around it, and they'd cut the weeds down. And sometime way back in the dark ages, it had some screens around it. Never had windows, but it had screens. Of course, those screens were all gone by the time I got there. And so they put me in that house, and it had all these rats. And I was so excited. I know people think that's so weird to say I was so excited, because when I would read all those books, I thought, I want to do that. I want to be just like that. I want to be just like that. And when I was in Tennessee Temple, when missionaries would come through talking about having rats and roaches and this stuff, and I thought, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do every bit of it. I had the biggest rats I'd ever seen, big jungle rats, had just taken over the whole house. And I wrote letters home and said, I've got rats over here as big as elephants. I was so excited. And I had roaches, and this was wonderful. It was wonderful because I mean that didn't last. But I was excited because I'm a missionary. I am a missionary. I've got rats. And I'd been there just a couple of days, and I looked up and I saw the biggest spider I had ever seen in my life on the wall.
Mm.
So I thought, wow, I've never seen a spider that big. And I thought I should swat it. But when I started to swat it, it jumped at me. Well, I reacted. Most people would. And then when I recovered, I thought, oh, wow. Not only do I have spiders, I have attack spiders. Now, how many missionaries do you know that have attack spiders? And I was
Praise the Lord, not this one.
I was so excited. I was so excited. But you know, I wanted to tell people about Jesus. People would ask me before I went to the field, what are you going to do? That would irritate me. I know they meant you're going to be a nurse or a teacher or a secretary, or what are you going to do? I'm going to be a missionary. A missionary goes and tells people about Jesus. That's what I'm going to do. And so I wanted to do that, but I realized I couldn't tell anybody anything because I didn't talk to them. I'd go out and see the people, and I would want to talk to them so bad. And of course, I didn't talk to them. And I was sure they were making fun of me. After I learned the language, I realized they really had making fun of me. But I was so anxious to learn the language. I was studying Indonesian at that time. And then later went down to the South Coast in the jungle. But this was my initial entrance into the country there.
Well, your story has many unique aspects, but one is that you went as a single missionary. And I know I've had, I am a wife and a mother, and so it's a lot of my listeners, but I do have a lot of single women listen. And I think sometimes they can feel like maybe they're misplaced in God's will because they don't have that role of wife and mother. So do you have a word of encouragement for the single lady who's wanting to serve the Lord in the calling that God's put on her life?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not talking to sometimes I've talked to single girls in colleges or their dorm devotions and different things, and they're 20 years old and think they're old maids already. And I like to talk to them as you commit yourself to the Lord. That's number one. It's normal to want to be married. I was kind of weird. I wanted to be a missionary, and nothing was going to get in my way. But it's normal to want to get married. But sometimes that's not God's will for us. There's nothing wrong with that. That's great. That's wonderful. Ask me. That's wonderful. So I tell them, you get before the Lord and you say, Lord, I'm committing myself to you. I would love to have a husband, and you'd better pray about one. It's okay to pray for a husband. It's okay to tell God you want a husband, but don't make any, you tell him, but if you don't give me a husband, that's going to be all right too. I had a roommate, she wasn't a roommate, we were from the same church. And she was so spiritual that she put me to shame. But she said over and over again, God's called me to mission field, but I will not go single. People in the church were praying for her a husband. Guy came in, joined the church, said God called in the mission field, took one look at her, he took a look at him, it was all over. And everybody says, praise the Lord, God's answered our prayer. She hadn't been married very long until he was put in prison. He stole a motorcycle and we were just getting into trouble. And my friend there quit church, never went back again. I would come on furlough, go visit her, try to get her to come back to church. She never came back to church again because she put conditions. God called me, but I will not go single. Ever do that. Excuse me. Don't ever do that. And God's not in the business of making you unhappy. And if he calls you to serve him in a mission field or wherever, single, then he's going to make you happy. Do I look like I'm unhappy?
You look like you are a very happy woman.
I would take anything for the life that God's given me. And remember this too, a lot of things that I would never have been able to do if I had been married. So there are a lot of advantages to being single. And if God calls you to serve Him single, look at those advantages.
Yes.
Don't look at the
Well,
disadvantages.
speaking of that, you talked about desiring to be a missionary to a primitive group. Do you mind to tell us a little bit about the people that you ministered to? Because, following up the conversation we just had, it was a different environment than what you grew up with in South Carolina. So some of that, I think that tenacity and pioneering missionary spirit, the Lord knew what He was doing. Pastor Sexton, my former pastor, always said, this is for that. And I saw that in your story. God gave you this and it was for that. So share with us a little bit about the people that you ministered to.
Well, as I said before, I wanted to go to primitive people. And I went to the south coast of the island in the jungle. And I was working with very primitive people. They had just come out of cannibalism, and they had some interesting stories that I was hearing from them when I first got there. And they had an unwritten language. Nobody had ever learned their language. We missionaries went in and opened the station and cleared off some place to smooth off and make a place for the little mission airplane to land. Now the float plane could land on the river as well, but we had where the real plane could land, and began a ministry with the people. And my job was to analyze their language and reduce it to writing, make the alphabet and figure out the grammar and write the grammar book. And eventually that was to do Bible translation. But in the beginning was just to learn their language and to be able to talk to them. And people were responsive. They liked us, they wanted us, and they wanted to hear. And so that made it really fun to really want to learn their language in a hurry, because you wanted to talk to them in their language, because they were just like, tell us, here we are, tell us something. And so they fell in love with the people. I remember at Tennessee Temple, a preacher was there for chapel, and he pointed his finger. I felt it was pointed right straight at me, and he said, don't go unless you love those people. And it really bothered me. I thought, how can I love somebody I don't know? Well, it took about 5 minutes to fall in love with those people. And God gave me such a love for those people. And we wanted to learn their language and give them the gospel in their own language and help them to understand it. Something that they've never heard anything like that before. They don't even know who God is. So you got to start right back at creation. And who is God? You can't just, start with, believe on the Lord Jesus Christ and thou shalt be saved. No, you got to start all the way back at the beginning. And what a journey it was. And then to see them come to know the Lord and understanding and watching them grow, what a journey it has been.
And remind me, how long did you serve there on the field?
Well, I was there 40 years and 3 months, and those 3 months were important, because then I can say I was there over 40 years.
I love it. Well, do you want to share with us maybe a particular story or two, somebody that you were able to share the gospel with, or just, you have stories galore in this book. I would encourage anybody to get this one. I know you've written another one. How many books do you have?
2. The other
Two.
was from Christianity, talking about the cannibals that we were able to contact.
Well, you have no shortage of stories, but maybe pull out 1 or 2 of your favorite to just whet our appetite and encourage people to grab your book.
Well, the one that comes right to mind right now is Turbis. Turbis was the most powerful witch doctor at Singo. And he was married to Pemar. Pam Otter was one of our first converts, and she and I became really good friends. And if people would come to my house and say, your friend is sick, I knew who it was. It was Pam Otter. And so we became real good friends. And but Tudorbis, he was he was a witch doctor. People, they could come to him and give him a little something, like if they were mad at somebody, and want him pay him to put a curse on their enemy. Well, they believed that he was sleeping in his house, but he could go out into the jungle and turn himself into a poisonous snake or a wild boar. And when that person went out into the jungle to hunt for food, it would attack them and kill them. So people, they felt that it was Tudorbis that did that, although he was at home in the bed. But the bed was on the floor, just a mat on the floor. But they believed that he could turn himself into a snake or something like that. So they feared him. And we got along. We had a little problem one time because he beat Pam Otter because she came to my literacy class, and I had to go confront the witch doctor. And I won't go into that one. That would make too long a story. But Mother got saved, and then she had two boys, Bernard and Andreas. Well, Bernard got saved, and we kept praying for Tudorbis. It was several years, actually. I don't remember how long it was. It was several years, and Tudorbis got saved. And I came home and retired. Pam, she died, and Tudorbis was still there. I came home to retire. I went back for a visit, and Tudorbis came up to the path to meet me, and he was very sick, and he said he was too sick to come down to the airstrip. And I said, well, let me put my stuff down, and I'll come back down and see you. And I went down to see him, and I thought he was a very sick man. Well, he died that night. The next day, it's an all-day thing because they buried them the same day, and they mourn all day. And so you just sit there with the people all day long. And so I was there with the people all day long, and I was sitting there, and I got to thinking, remembering Tudorbis, the witch doctor, and then remembering Tudorbis, the Christian. And I thought, I remember when he was the most feared man in the village. And I thought that day he died, nobody feared Tudorbis because the Lord had changed him. And what a thrill. What a thrill. And Bernard, his son, is now the pastor of the church there at Galore. That's one of my favorite stories.
It's a beautiful story. And I'm just listening to that. And I remember reading about that and your confrontation with the witch doctor and so many other stories. And I'm thinking now, I think that's why a smile was plastered on your face, because you have seen the power of the gospel. You have seen what the light of Christ can do in a dark place, and the power that it has to completely transform lives and families and villages. And that is amazing.
I tell you, it's an excitement that you can't explain to see people who had never even heard the name of God to understand who he is through the power of the Holy Spirit, because I can't make them understand that. Only the Holy Spirit can make them understand that, and to get saved and see the conviction of sin, and see this and watch that, and then watch them grow. What a joy. You want to go back and start over.
If only we had more lives. Could you give specifically a word of encouragement to the mothers who might be listening? Because I know as a mother, I have 5 children, and I want the utmost best for them, and I want them to follow God's will wherever that leads them. But I think sometimes when it comes to missions work, there can be a little tug at a mother's heart of that's so far away, that's so different. Should God lead a child to a place like where you're serving? I mean, sometimes it can be hard to understand or accept a lifestyle that is so different. I mean, you're talking about living in the jungles. So do you have encouragement for the mother who is trying to nurture just a heart for missions, who is trying to be open to how God might lead in the life of their child. But if that starts to go in a way that, selfishly the mother wants to hold back and be like, well, that's not exactly what I had in mind. What would you say?
I tell you this is something that I've thought about a lot, because I say we talk about the missionary and sacrifices that the missionary made, but we don't talk about the mothers or the grandmothers who are turning their children loose to allow them to go. And I think that the mothers just have to make the same commitment that you want your children to make. We had a couple that had 6 children, and at one time they were in 5 different countries because they just raised their children to serve the Lord, and they just spread out as missionaries all over the world, it seemed like. And it was amazing to see that. And you think, well, that mother, because she's going to not go see her grandchildren. Maybe years between seeing grandchildren. And the sacrifices that a mother makes, so many people don't think about that. So mothers have to make the same commitment that you want your children to make, that you have to make a commitment to turn them loose. The possibility of them going in a foreign country that you may not see your grandchildren for years at a time.
That is so good, and that is true.
God gives grace.
He does. And I didn't realize the impact of that until we came. So much of the deputation and the preparation was on us. So we were called to go, and we were called to serve. But as we stepped on that airplane, I realized there were people that were called to let go. And they had as much a part in that surrender as we did in aspects.
Yes.
Actually did a podcast episode talking about that. But God does give grace. And we live in a day and age of technology, and we're not in the jungle. So usually we have a pretty clear signal, and we can still talk to the grandparents. But, I'm just hearing your story, and as incredible as it is even just more incredible, the God that you serve, that I serve, that we get to serve, and how no place is too remote or too removed from civilization. 1, for him to not be there, and 2, for his power to not just, like we said, cut through all of that and prove himself mighty.
Yeah, he's worthy. And if we always remember that, and it's a privilege. And if you can remember mothers and grandmothers and even grandfathers and fathers as well, that it's a privilege if God calls your children. You think, well, I'm making a sacrifice, but you're making a sacrifice for him. And he's the one that's worthy. And he'll make it up to you. I promise.
Well, this has been such a good conversation. I would encourage anyone listening to get your books, to read more, because there's so much more to this story that we just can't fit into this interview here. But any parting words of encouragement that you want to leave with us before we close out this interview?
Just know that when we have the privilege, and I emphasize privilege, to serve the King of Kings, you can't do better than that. There's nothing that you can do in this world that will be greater than serving the King of Kings. That doesn't mean you're going to the mission field. It just means that you're serving the King of Kings, and he's first in your life. He's first in whatever you do, or whatever you say, or any decisions you make. So you make it for him. And what a privilege. I'm 85 years old now. I almost died a few weeks ago. And it makes me have a whole new outlook on what time I have left. And all I know is I want to be honored. And that's what I've always wanted. I haven't always done it. We get involved in life that we sometimes forget who it is we're serving. But if we keep in mind that we're serving the King of Kings. We love him, and he's worthy of all that we are.
Well, that is wonderful. Thank you so much for this interview. I am so thankful that your health has stabilized, that you are doing better. God has much more for you, and I'm thankful that joining me on this podcast is one of those things, because it has been such a joy to get to talk to you, to hear your stories from your mouth and not just through your words. And I'm excited to get to share this with the listeners. I really think that it will be a blessing and a help. And I know that that's what you desire, that gospel work. We talked about what is a missionary. It's just gospel work. And so thank you so much for joining me for this interview. It has been such a blessing.
Thank you so much. It's been a joy. Thank you.